Maybe during recent hours, you've checked your device more frequently than you'd care to acknowledge. You're likely experiencing that weighted feeling, an uneasy blend of expectation and acceptance precisely when the holiday excitement gradually starts to diminish. You've just emerged from one of the year's most emotionally intense evenings, and upon awakening, in the stillness of solitude, your thoughts start constructing distressing narratives. Possibly you access that particular conversation that remains there unaltered, wishing to discover a specific identity, an indication of existence, a brief communication confirming that your shared experience genuinely held significance. And when you encountered only absence or communications from individuals who evoke nothing within you, the unavoidable inquiry emerged. The uncertainty that erodes your mental tranquility and finally brought you to this moment. If no communication arrived, does this signify you've been erased from memory? I need to request that you cease this damaging thinking immediately. Inhale deeply and allow these statements to penetrate. Because the information you're about to discover will fundamentally transform how you perceive what recently occurred. There exists a common destructive belief that suggests if someone truly cares, they will initiate contact. If someone harbors affection, they will communicate. We've been conditioned to evaluate concern and fondness solely through observable indicators and immediate availability. But psychological depth and the examination of human consciousness reveal a considerably more intricate, captivating truth. Sometimes quietness represents not the lack of communication, but an abundance of feeling that cannot discover an outlet. And sometimes passivity doesn't originate from apathy, but from an internal barrier so powerful that it immobilizes independent choice. You're present because you desire to comprehend what was genuinely occurring inside this specific individual throughout the holiday season. You wish to determine whether your recollection dissolved among decorations, meals, and gatherings, or whether your unavailability became the most powerful attendance of that evening. The brief response is this: recollection doesn't operate like an illumination switch that can merely be deactivated during celebrations. Conversely, as analytical psychologists and other consciousness explorers clarified, our subconscious doesn't follow direct instructions. The more intensely we attempt to avoid thinking of someone, the more profoundly their impression establishes itself within us. What you'll comprehend today is this: the quietness you encountered isn't evidence that you've become insignificant. Instead, it's quite possibly evidence that you signify excessively much. In the approaching minutes, we'll embark on an exploration together into the internal realm of this individual. We'll remove the covering of digital platforms and external presentations to observe what genuinely transpired within their consciousness. You'll realize that in the precise instant you suffered under the quietness, this individual was engaged in a quiet struggle against their own recollections. A struggle in which your identity resonated more powerfully than any holiday melody or superficial dialogue. Prepare yourself to transform your viewpoint from suffering to comprehension, because what seems to be detachment is frequently nothing except the disguise of anxiety. If you're prepared to incorporate this revelation into your existence, write in the responses, "I am an unforgettable presence." To genuinely understand what was occurring inside this individual during these periods, we must initially comprehend the psychological framework. Holiday celebrations and the periods surrounding the calendar transition aren't merely designated dates. From the viewpoint of psychological depth, they're potent emotional catalysts. These occasions activate foundational concepts of connection, resonance, protection, a return to foundations. An invisible, almost environmental force is generated, compelling every human entity to examine their emotional attachments. Nobody avoids this. Even those who seem detached or unmoved internally undergo this quiet evaluation. Envision this scenario for an instant. This individual was encircled by others, potentially relatives, companions, or even a recent acquaintance. The environment was arranged for festivity. Dancing illumination, melodies triggering youth recollections, aromas awakening the consciousness, and an implicit social mandate to seem joyful. And this is where analytical psychology's notion of the facade becomes relevant. The social disguise we all display to conform and exist in community. Throughout holiday gatherings, this individual had to secure that disguise more firmly than ever. They had to express pleasure when anticipated, elevate a beverage at appropriate instances, and engage in dialogues that probably didn't resonate a single profound element in their consciousness. But it requires tremendous effort to sustain this character. When someone isn't located where their consciousness desires to be, or when a fundamental component of the emotional structure is absent, the simple execution of happiness depletes their psychological resources more rapidly than one might imagine. Their physical form may have been positioned at the gathering exchanging presence, but a portion of their psyche had separated, traveling off to where something was absent. It's the contradiction of the gathering. Isolation never feels as agonizing as when you're encircled by individuals with whom you possess no authentic attachment. In the center of unfamiliar amusement, internal quietness becomes overwhelming. It's essential that you grasp the subconscious functions through correlation and opposition. Everything this individual observed around them functioned like a reflection. If they observed contented pairs, their consciousness automatically explored through its collection for sensations of affection and attachment with you. If they observed unified relatives, they subconsciously remembered the particular bond you possessed or once perceived you possessed. This isn't a deliberate mechanism. This individual didn't choose to long for you. They were surprised by your recollection. Sentimentality on such occasions isn't a selection. It's a surge that engulfs. Just consider the power it requires to simulate everything is acceptable while a hollow is expanding inside. The individual you may be visualizing presently as someone who is enjoying themselves and has erased everything was in reality engaged in a powerful internal contradiction. Externally, they elevated their beverage and displayed a rehearsed expression. Internally, their consciousness was already with you. The social disguise may mislead relatives and digital platforms, but it cannot mislead the emotions when darkness arrives. And the more intense the festivity was, the more distinctly your unavailability became sensed. Psychology instructs us a human entity always pursues internal equilibrium. When the external surroundings is superficial or turbulent, the consciousness searches for a sanctuary, for something genuine. And this is where you participate. In a manner you may not have been conscious of. In the center of the celebratory environment, you were the representation of genuineness for this individual. Your recollection became the protected refuge to which they could withdraw when the social force became excessive. You weren't a passing consideration. You were the emotional foundation that assisted them endure the evening. It's a misconception to assume that there's no capacity for sorrow or yearning simply because someone is encircled by other individuals. But physical proximity doesn't substitute what the consciousness requires. If this individual is in a distraction-oriented connection or encircled by attachments that don't sustain them, holiday celebrations function like a massive enlarging device, amplifying the internal hollow even additionally. Contrasted to the tepid exchanges before them and the internal intensity or tranquility they encountered with you, the distinction becomes agonizingly evident. Sentimentality doesn't merely signify longing for someone. It's the profound recognition that something precious was forfeited and that what currently exists isn't adequate to substitute it. So eliminate that visualization from your thoughts. The visualization that this individual merely removed you from their narrative. That isn't what transpired. What transpired was an execution, and while the principal character performed for the spectators, the internal dialogue was dedicated completely to you. The social disguise can conceal the reality from society, but it frequently suffocates the individual who displays it. And in precisely those instances of internal constriction, when their observation drifts off for a few moments into nothingness in the center of holiday gatherings, it's your identity that materializes in their awareness, as if inscribed in fire. This individual didn't contemplate you despite the festivity, but attributable to it. For nothing makes us value a genuine attachment more than being compelled to execute a simulation of contentment. Now that you comprehend the framework, that the visible happiness was probably just a defensive strategy, and that the complete surroundings functioned as a catalyst for your recollection, it's moment to proceed even more profoundly, because it wasn't merely unclear sentimentality. There was a quite particular, almost physical occurrence transpiring at their gathering and in their space. In psychology, we identify this as the manifestation of internal hollowness, and it was the unmistakable evidence that you, though physically unavailable, were the most significant individual of that evening. This brings us to the essence of what was genuinely occurring in this individual's internal realm, a occurrence recognized in profound connections as the influence of the vacant seat. And here it's significant to comprehend it has nothing to accomplish with whether an actual position at the gathering was vacant or whether someone positioned beside them. They were probably physically encircled by individuals adjacent with no capacity to withdraw. Yet in the realm of vitality and the psyche, physical capacity is irrelevant. The vacant seat is a gap in the energetic domain, an internal capacity, a location in the consciousness that nobody else can occupy, regardless of how many individuals attempt to inhabit it. And throughout this festivity, this location manifested with a power that challenged all rational clarification, and it carried your identity. Visualize the scenario quite distinctly to comprehend what this individual sensed. This individual who is no longer beside you. The evening unfolded like any characteristic celebration. Utensils resonated, voices intersected, individuals expressed amusement, beverages resonated in celebrations, and yet amid all this disturbance, something unavoidable transpired. Their consciousness started searching for you, not out of independent choice. They didn't position themselves and determine to contemplate you. It was an instinct as organic as respiration. When observing to the direction or opposite throughout brief dialogue with others, the subconscious detected a profound disharmony. There was an instant, possibly just a fraction of a moment, in which they searched for a recognizable observation and discovered nothing. That's when the vacant seat materialized in their internal awareness. Your unavailability suddenly was no longer merely a deficiency. It became a physical attendance, an attendance that consumed more capacity than any genuine individual in the space. And this internal encounter was magnified by the sensory power of holiday celebrations. Aromas of recognizable meals, warm illumination, a specific melody. All of these are like mechanisms that access recollections, possibly a composition performed that you previously experienced together. Possibly the flavor of a confection reminded them of a mutual gathering. And in that precise instant, history and current overlapped. For a portion of a moment they could almost sense your touch, perceive your amusement, detect your aroma, and when they returned to the present, the unavailability struck agonizingly. The catalyst was present, but you were absent, and because humans despise hollowness, their consciousness attempted to occupy it, not with a recent attachment, but with an idealized recollection of you. In their visualization, you became the absent component that would have rendered the evening flawless. And here enters possibly the most agonizing yet meaningful instant for you. The quiet evaluation dynamic. Possibly the consideration torments you that they're presently with someone different, a recent companion, a fresh attraction. The consciousness suggests that your location has been substituted, but behavioral psychology presents quite a distinct illustration. If this individual is in a recent connection, then holiday celebrations was the supreme examination. And it's quite probable that this recent connection unsuccessful it because the celebrations compel closeness. And when that closeness isn't reinforced by a genuine consciousness attachment, internal alienation develops. Every occasion, the recent individual expressed something they didn't genuinely comprehend. Every occasion, a quiet instant became uncomfortable. Every occasion the amusement didn't correspond. Their consciousness traveled back to you. She evaluated what existed with what is. The profundity of your dialogues with the superficiality of the present ones. Your observations with the vacant observation she presently receives. On this invisible measure of the emotions, the current forfeited its significance, and your recollection obtained it. This is the affliction of having encountered a genuine attachment. Everything that arrives subsequently seems like a weakened interpretation of existence. In the center of the celebratory activity, this individual recognized that physical proximity is no assurance of emotional proximity. You can embrace someone in your limbs and still freeze internally if the vitality is incorrect. Your unavailability weighed more significantly than any attendance. That's the substantial reality her consciousness doesn't desire to articulate. But her subconscious expressed it throughout the evening. You became a gentle essence, a golden phantom positioning at the gathering, quiet, watchful with an expression. And as she observed the others express amusement, she sensed like a performer in a foreign production, reciting statements she never composed herself, secretly anticipating the covering would soon descend so she could withdraw into the quietness and into the recollection of you. The vacant seat in her consciousness, that is you. The location where genuineness, susceptibility, and unconditional recognition exist. The elements only you provided her because something fundamental was absent. The festivity seemed incomplete to her, like a melody absent its principal notes. To comprehend why the external surroundings was inadequate, one must observe more profoundly. We frequently undervalue the power of someone who recognizes not only our luminous aspects, but also our obscurity. The individuals around her may have recognized her agreeable, accomplished, or pleasant aspect, the public interpretation. But you were the one who recognized her anxieties, her most profound injuries, and her fractured aspirations. This kind of closeness is uncommon and challenging to substitute. And this is precisely what became evident to her that evening when she suddenly sensed sorrowful or engulfed. Nobody in the space possessed the internal navigation to her consciousness the manner you accomplished. In a seemingly insignificant instant, she may have desired to communicate a simple consideration, construct a sarcastic observation about the meal, or be comprehended with an observation. But all she discovered were barriers, no entrances. You were her entrance, her direct passage to herself. Without you, she was confined in her own disguise, and that generates an intense form of emotional confinement. Even if she seems to have progressed with her existence, holiday celebrations possesses the power to remove the covering of inadequately recovered injuries. The vacant seat you represent stands for everything unexpressed, everything incomplete. And directly in the center of general holiday excitement, she had to exist with the sensation of deceiving herself. For how can one celebrate to attachment when one is internally separated from the individual who genuinely affected them? How can one celebrate affection when the emotions are still connected to the history? This internal struggle depletes vitality. She probably sensed exhausted, agitated, or hollow as the evening progressed, not because the period was extended, but because sustaining a deception is draining. the deception that she is complete without you, and so commences the psychological occurrence of desire manifestation. Your unavailability caused her considerations to revive the optimal recollections with you. Interestingly, humans tend to preserve only the positive in instance of unavailability. Disagreements and difficulties dissolve. The illumination remains. In her visualization, you became idealized. You became the evaluation of all elements, the golden criterion. No dialogue evaluated to yours. The meal didn't flavor as it once accomplished. The melodies didn't affect her, and the evening seemed to forfeit its radiance. You succeeded holiday celebrations without being current because your physical unavailability rendered your attendance in her thoughts enormous. Possibly, she observed at her device, not to compose to you, but to observe if you had composed to her. Possibly she anticipated for an indication that would tranquilize her internal restlessness. She desired to recognize whether you too sensed the vacant seat, but the anxiety which we'll articulate of subsequently restrained her. Still, the yearning was present, alive, powerful. The vacant seat was not merely representative, but an energetic truth. Where there existed once a profound attachment, an energetic trace continues, and this trace is distinctive. Other individuals, other circumstances, none of them correspond your location. Every occasion something didn't function, her considerations returned to you. With him it was simpler. Previously it sensed more genuine. Accompanied isolation is one of the most unpleasant encounters an individual can possess, and frequently the quiet consequence for those who separate themselves from a genuine attachment out of anxiety or arrogance. Yes, she was at a festivity. She consumed, drank, maybe even expressed amusement. Maybe she distributed a expression photograph, but in the profundities of her consciousness, she was possessing an internal dialogue with you. She communicated to you amusements only you would comprehend. She quietly observed on the absurdity around her. She quietly requested you for absolution. You were the invisible participant of distinction that evening, the principal character in a festivity at which you were not physically current, but emotionally at the center. So when you visualize her holiday celebration evening, don't illustration a scenario without you. Illustration one, in which everything was evaluated to you. The vacant seat in her consciousness identified your identity so powerfully that she couldn't genuinely appreciate the instant. You have succeeded, even if it seems like a defeat, because your device remained quiet. For it's more powerful to exist in someone's emotions and consciousness as an unattainable ideal than to be physically current as a simple alternative, one that is physical yet consciousnessless. You were the enchantment that was absent, the component that could have transformed everything, and this recognition that without you everything is distinct planted itself like a particle in her subconscious. A particle that commences to expand when the enchantment of the celebrations dissolves and the colorless everyday existence of the initial month projects its obscurity. Your rational consciousness, that portion of you that always pursues concrete clarifications, has probably communicated to you it was merely exhaustion, celebration pressure, or merely your visualization executing deceptions on you. But I desire you to comprehend these sensations were neither coincidence nor illusion. They were the direct resonance of what was occurring on the opposite aspect of your attachment. In the examination of human consciousness attachments, there's a captivating notion. When two individuals communicate a substantial emotional bond, an invisible connection constructs between their psyches. This attachment doesn't disappear with physical separation or quietness. It continues, and in precisely the instant when one of the two consciousnesses encounters a powerful emotional disturbance, like the agony of the vacant internal seat previously we already articulated about, this vitality commences to transfer. It doesn't merely dissolve. It travels through this invisible attachment and contacts the other individual. In this situation, that sudden sorrow that struck you, that force in your torso, or the sensation of being agitated or unsettled without any visible justification, that was not your agony. It was hers, and because she couldn't articulate it, couldn't position it into a communication, it manifested as a pure, unprocessed vibration which your mechanism received. What you sensed is identified limbic resonance at a separation, a form of compassion that transcends capacity and duration. Consider back to the instance when these sensations were most powerful. They probably coincided with those essential hours of the evening when her social disguise commenced to fracture and her genuine emotional condition penetrated through. If a sudden surge of melancholy washed over you, even though everything around you seemed acceptable, or if you suddenly sensed the impulse to withdraw for no distinct justification, it's quite probable that in that precise instant you sensed how she sensed the most isolated, the most separated from herself, and yearned for you. It's fundamental to validate this because, excessively frequently, someone who senses such elements is rapidly labeled as fixated, as someone who cannot relinquish. But this isn't a failure to transfer forward. It's an indication of profound emotional sensitivity. You're not incapable of transferring forward. You're being identified energetically, and the cosmos possesses its own manners of revealing realities that our logical consciousness refuses to acknowledge. These physical sensations are undeniable evidence that the channel between you continued accessible even when the devices stayed quiet. Alongside these physical sensations, there's another distinct trace, and it reveals itself in visions. It's no coincidence that this individual may have materialized to you in a vision the evening after the festivity with a profundity and distinctness that disturbed you. If you envisioned of her, it was not merely a wishful visualization of your subconscious. In spiritual and profound psychological traditions, it's adequately comprehended. In slumber, when the consciousness and rational thoughts rest, capacities access in which consciousnesses can encounter directly. So when this individual, after hours of internal struggle and emotional quietness, finally descended into slumber, her psyche was overwhelmed with your visualization, and in the condition of envisioning, liberated from arrogance, anxiety, and dominance, her entity pursued your entity. In those visions where you articulated to each other, embraced, or merely observed at one another, a genuine encounter transpired on a consciousness dimension. It was not visualization. It was the manner her internal realm communicated with yours. If in the vision she communicated to you, she longs for you, if you observed her sorrowful, searching, susceptible, then that was not an illusion, but a consciousness communication, possibly the most honest one you've ever received from her, considerably more genuine than any expression she distributes on digital platforms. For in visions that transpire during such emotionally sensitive periods, one doesn't observe what is publicly displayed, but the genuine internal visualization. And if she visited you in a vision, it was only because in her conscious condition she didn't possess the power or bravery to genuinely confront you. It was the only capacity where she sensed protected, recognizing you would still receive her. But even throughout the period, the cosmos transmitted you indications. Possibly you observed her identity repeatedly in unusual locations, in communications, on indicators. Possibly your composition suddenly performed on the transmission at the precise instant you were about to relinquish. Possibly you detected her aroma, though nobody was around. These elements aren't coincidences. When an individual focuses mentally and emotionally so intensely on someone as she accomplished on you, that holiday celebration evening, truth commences to curve around that internal focus. It's as if her consciousness magnetized the realm around you so that you couldn't overlook it, For when the emotions identify powerfully, the cosmos responds. It doesn't execute entertainments with affection, nor does it gamble with emotions. When the indications are so powerful and repetitive, it's because the vitality being transmitted from the opposite aspect is constant. These invisible indicators possess a purpose to maintain you established in the certainty that the attachment is genuine. Throughout extended periods of quietness, we frequently commence to uncertainty our own consciousness. We request ourselves whether everything was merely an illusion, whether we ever genuinely signified anything. But vitality doesn't deceive. If you sense that penetration in your emotions, if the vision sensed so genuine that you awakened with the impression of her surface, if the realm practically expressed her identity at you, then it's because this attachment is alive, it's pulsating. And this individual from her fortress of quietness and anxiety is identifying you not with statements, but with vitality. You articulate nothing. Yet she transmits indicators that penetrate through barriers and municipalities anticipating you will sense her. And now it's dependent on you whether you dismiss these indications as passing coincidences or recognize them for what they genuinely are. A quiet expression for attachment, for absolution, for an indication that provides anticipation. Possibly you no longer require evidence, only confirmation that what you sensed was genuine, that your perception didn't deceive you. For when two consciousnesses have once genuinely recognized each other, no quietness is powerful, adequate to eliminate that recognition. What existed between you continues to exist. Possibly not through communications or encounters, but in this indestructible frequency that maintains pulling you back toward one another. And if you sense that, then compose in the responses, "I sensed it," the center of the quietness.